So we left off talking about our light-dependent reactions, using that water, splitting that water apart so we can get our electrons for the chlorophyll molecules. Then we'll see where those protons come in a little bit. And then producing this oxygen, right? So oxygen is a product of photosynthesis. And so here we see this aquatic plant. And all of these bubbles here are the oxygen that it's producing. Okay, and all of these plants, anything that does photosynthesis, is producing oxygen, which is really nice for organisms like us that need that oxygen. Okay, and so after those electrons are picked up and passed by that primary electron receptor, they're going to enter this electron transport chain. Okay, and so within the thylakoid, we've got those hydrogen ions, some of which are from the water. And then we've got these hydrogen ions outside of the thylakoid within the stroma. So what we see is that these electrons drop down to lower energy states. So as they do this, they're releasing energy. And that energy is used by these proton pumps to take these hydrogen ions, these protons, and pump them into the thylakoid. What we're doing here is creating a concentration gradient where we have a lot more hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid than we do outside. We'll see this exact same process, almost exactly the same, in cellular respiration as well. So make sure that you know kind of what's happening here. So we're pumping hydrogen ions in to the thylakoid. And so because there are so many inside, they naturally want to flow down the concentration gradient, right? That's diffusion. That's how this works. So we have this ATP synthase, this enzyme that these protons will flow out of. And as they do this, as they move down this concentration gradient, we utilize that to make ATP. We should have some images here. Okay, and so this is going to work a lot like a dam. So we have all of this water backed up behind this generator. And we see that with the ATP synthase, all those protons. And so as that water runs through this generator, it spins it and it produces electricity. Now with the protons, as they flow through that enzyme, they're going to start producing energy in the form of ATP. And so we can utilize that energy. And so here we see that whole process. Again, light-dependent reactions happening in the thylakoid. We're using sunlight and water. That sunlight hits these chlorophyll molecules, releasing electrons. They then get sent to the electron transport chain. That water is stripped apart so that we can get those electrons for these chlorophyll molecules. Then we also have those protons, which are now inside the thylakoid. Oxygen is released. Electrons jump down these energy levels, pumping hydrogen ions across. Now we have a really strong concentration gradient. Those protons flow through this enzyme, and we start making ATP. Okay. So then those electrons then go back into this process where they will hook up with this chlorophyll B molecule. Then we send this electron through this secondary electron acceptor. And then our NADP picks this up and turns it into NADPH. Okay. So now we've got our NADPH, our ATP, and our oxygen produced here. And so this just shows a slightly different image of this whole process within a thylakoid. Again, photosystem 1, we've got that sunlight coming in, stripping off those electrons. We've broken apart this water. Oxygen's released, hydrogen inside the thylakoid. That electron moves into the electron transport chain, and we're pumping hydrogen ions into the thylakoid. That electron then goes to this next photosystem, which is eventually picked up by NADPH. And then those hydrogen ions start moving through this ATP synthase. And as they do this, they turn this turbine so that we can produce ATP. Okay, so again, things that we need for this process: sunlight and water. We produce oxygen, NADPH, and ATP. And again, these are the light-dependent reactions. Okay. So what pigment is responsible for converting the sun's energy to biologically useful chemical energy? Chlorophyll. What colors of light drive this reaction most efficiently? Here we're going to have our blue and our red. And where do these light-dependent reactions occur? In the thylakoid. Okay. Now we can jump into our light-independent reactions, okay, and kind of finish what this whole photosynthesis cycle is. So these reactions are going to happen in the stroma. So this is still within the chloroplast, but it's that space outside of the thylakoids. We're going to use the ATP and NADPH that were made in the light-dependent reactions. Then we're also going to use the carbon dioxide that's pulled in from the atmosphere. Okay. And then what are we going to make? In this step, it's all about the sugar. We're making the glucose, C6H12O6. You will often see light-independent reactions referred to as the Calvin cycle. Okay. So here we see this Calvin cycle. We've got a special enzyme called Rubisco. You don't need to know this, but it's going to pick up these carbon dioxide molecules, and we're going to bond some of these together to form a molecule. We're going to use the ATP, the NADPH, to split this into two G3P molecules. A couple of these come together, and we're going to build a sugar. Okay, basically we're modifying these carbon dioxides, putting them together along with some protons to create this sugar, the C6H12O6. Okay, and so here we see this whole process again. So this is our chloroplast outlined in the dark green. Here we've got our thylakoid. Light energy comes up into those chlorophyll molecules. We create this ATP and NADPH, getting rid of producing this oxygen. We needed that water for these light-dependent reactions. That ATP, NADPH come into the stroma, and they're going to be used within the Calvin cycle along with the carbon dioxide to produce glucose. And of course, after this process, that ATP turns into ADP, that NADPH turns into NADP plus to go into this cycle. And this is kind of what you're going to be looking at in the cell collective lab for photosynthesis that you'll be doing this week. Okay. So what's going to limit photosynthesis? What are some things that are going to keep this process from occurring? Okay. Water and carbon dioxide. If you run out of water, you don't have those protons and electrons that you need for this process. If you run out of CO2, there's no possible way to build that sugar. And so these are the stoma that we see in leaves. Okay, we've got these stoma that can open and close, that can allow oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. But the issue that we see is that when it's hot out, and if the stoma were open, we would start losing that water. But if the stoma are closed, we keep that water in. However, they can't pull in the carbon dioxide. So we see in areas that are really dry and get really hot that there are a few adaptations that plants have made in order to find this balance between water and carbon dioxide. So our typical photosynthesis process is just the C3 cycle. Okay, and we see C3 plants. Okay, during the day, the stomata are open, pulls in carbon dioxide, does the Calvin cycle, light-dependent reactions. All of these things are happening. Okay, but if it's hot and dry, these plants are going to start losing water very quickly, and they're going to struggle to survive. Okay, so when we no longer have this carbon dioxide, because the stomata are closed, oxygen is going to build up. We get this photorespiration where it starts breaking down those sugars that have built up. Okay, and so this is not ideal for plants in hot and dry environments. So there are a couple of adaptations, C4 and CAM plants, that we'll look at in the next video.